In a glittering court where ambition wears silk and every smile hides a blade, a widowed prince is torn between duty to a ruthless fiancée and love for his fragile son. When a poor maid uncovers the shocking truth that the woman sworn to be a mother is secretly preventing the boy from walking again, she risks everything to speak. Before the eyes of the kingdom, one act of courage shatters deception and forces the prince to choose power or the only love that can save them both. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Candles burned high enough to touch the shallow vault of smoke that gathered beneath the ceiling, a bright haze over the heads of lords and ladies. Music braided through the great hall, violins alert and light, a lower viol in counterpoint, the rhythm neat as the figures of the dance. Prince Alaric stood at the edge of the marble floor with his gloved hands folded behind his back, a posture learned over years of being watched. He kept his gaze steady on the line of chandeliers, as if their blaze could instruct his face to be agreeable. The courtiers wanted cheer. They wanted certainty. They wanted him to look at Duchess Serafina as though nothing else existed. Serafina gave the hall what it desired with almost effortless economy. She moved among clusters of nobility, with a smile shaped for each group, the fall of her gown precise, her shoulders quiet and assured. When she lifted a glass, a ring of ruby stones at her wrist caught the light and threw it back in hard sparks. When she laughed, the sound seemed to touch the next circle of listeners and draw them nearer. She laid grace in the air as a person might lay cards, each one turned to advantage. A lord bowed to Alaric. Another spoke of the harvest. A matron praised the elegance of the evening, her voice a little high, a little loud. He answered each with what the throne required, measured intent, a nod that suggested attention, a phrase that placed concern where it should be. But his eyes, unfaithful to the scene, wandered to the open doorway across the hall. Beyond that passage lay the antechamber where Edmund rested. He had the habit of counting the measures of a dance before he allowed himself to look. 24 beats, a bow, then permit one glance. He negotiated with his own restraint like a man making treaties inside his ribs. When he looked, he saw only the soft spill of lamplight on the corridor and the silhouette of a maid passing briefly by. The musicians changed tune. The hall adjusted its step. Serafina's glance touched him from a distance and held a second longer than courtesy required. He felt the suggestion in it. Come stand beside me. Let them see you here. He let the suggestion pass through him and out of him like a draught through a door left ajar. A servant offered wine on a silver tray, the surface trembling from the passing feet around it. Alaric took a cup, lifted it to his lips, and found he could not swallow. There was a rose carved into the stem of the glass, a detail he had never noticed. He wondered if Edmund would notice it, if he would like the way the light played inside the bowl. He set the cup aside. "This is for the good of the realm," someone said near him, a voice pitched to be private, but not secret. "It is," Alaric replied, the words practiced, nearly weightless. He had said the same words to himself in the mirror, where his valet tied his cravat, to the steward who reviewed the list of titles attending, to the heir of his empty chamber before the door opened to admit another petition. He had not said them to his son. He did not know how to place that sentence in a room that contained Edmund's small bed, Edmund's quick-breathing chest, Edmund's hand lifting when he woke from unsettled sleep. The dance ended. Applause touched the edges of the room, and then evaporated, replaced by scattered conversations and the tilt of heads consulting the next figure. Serafina moved nearer at last, a drift of fragrance trailing her like the wake of a boat. Her eyes stayed bright. She had a wasp's clarity. She set her hand lightly on his sleeve before he could retreat. "You carry the evening as if it were heavier than it is," she said softly, voice pitched to the music. "Do I?" He placed the ghost of a smile where it could be seen, but not examined. "We are among friends," she returned, turning her face partly toward the nearest circle of listeners so that they could observe both her consideration And his reply, "Allow them joy. They have it," he said. "They are very eager." Her gaze followed his, quick, exact. It slid to the passageway. He felt the chill touch of being understood. She lifted her hand from his sleeve with a flake of a laugh and moved on, letting observers fill in the tableau of harmony. He exhaled. He counted again. 24 beats. He did not wait for all of them this time. In the antechamber, the air smelled different, less of perfume, more of warmed linen and lamp oil. The distant music came in like a memory of water heard through stone. Edmund lay upon a cushioned chaise, a light woolen blanket over his legs. His hair had darkened with damp where a cloth had touched his forehead. A physician had been and gone. The small box of instruments and tinctures stood open on a nearby table, with a neatness that suggested haste disguised as order. The boy's face softened as he slept, and tugged into worry as he woke, both in the same measure of breath. Clara sat beside him, a posture of stillness that did not forget watchfulness. Whatever else the palace asked of her, she kept one hand free for Edmund's blanket, one ear for his breath. Candlelight showed the work in her hands. They were not the unmarked hands of a lady, but capable, the nails clean, the fingers quick. She adjusted the pillow where his knees pressed together and looked up just as Alaric crossed the threshold. She rose at once, the bow of a servant, correct and quiet. He returned a nod and stood where the light didn't wake the child. A thread of cold night air slipped through a joint in the window and touched the room. The flame of the nearest candle lifted and leaned, then righted itself. It was a simple room for a royal palace, which made it feel honest. "How does he fare?" he asked. "Uneasy," she said. "The music makes him dream when he sleeps. He thinks he is riding. It rouses him." He looked at that small face, at the lashes darker now against the pallor of his cheeks. A knot pulled at his throat that he had learned not to show. "The physician?" "Just left," Clara answered. "He said to send for him if the fever returns. He believes it will not. And the regimen?" He kept his voice level. "He was to try his stretches this morning, and again tonight." "He did this morning," she said. "He is tired now." There were questions nested inside that answer. He could feel them against the inside of his chest. He let them remain nested. The physician's box gleamed under the candlelight with the false promise of certainty. Glass vials reflecting fire, polished metal catching the smallest spark. "Shall I stay?" he asked. Clara glanced at Edmund, at the line of his mouth easing as the music in the hall shifted to a slower tune. "If you like. He will sleep if the door stays closed." Alaric reached for the latch and drew the door nearer its jamb without letting it shut entirely. A finger's breadth remained, enough for sound to have an edge and not a blade. He went no closer to the bed than he must. His hands folded again in the same posture as in the hall, because habit was sometimes the only thing that did not require thought. "Your Highness," Clara began, and then stopped, then began again, choosing ground that wouldn't break beneath her step. "If I might fetch another measure of his medicine before the bottle cools, it would be better for him. The draught is in the physician's chamber." "Go," he said. "I will watch him." She nodded and moved into the passage with the quick float of someone who knew exactly how long the corridor took and how long Edmund's sleep usually kept. She left the light step of a person trained not to be heard. In her wake, the antechamber gathered itself into a smaller, deeper quiet. Alaric stood at the foot of his son's couch and watched the blanket rise and fall. He watched the flame on the table make a small tremble of itself. He watched his own breath slow to match the boy's. He tried to think of the color of the gowns in the great hall, of the pattern of the floor under the dancers' feet, of the sound of the last piece the musicians had played. The thoughts came to him like birds that had been shot at. They flinched and lifted before he could hold them. From the corridor, a murmur drifted. He would have let it pass if his name had not been tucked inside it like a coin concealed in a handkerchief. "The prince will not be troubled by details," a woman's voice said, quiet, exact. He did not move toward the door, but something in him leaned. The next words were low in the physician's more careful cadence, and then the woman's voice again, as sure and unhurried as before. Clara had gone toward that voice. In the passage, the smell of beeswax from the polished paneling mingled with the sharper scent of a newly snuffed wick. Clara walked with her hands close to her skirts, mind counting the steps to the physician's chamber and the breath she could take before Edmund might stir. She passed one servant whose head bent dutifully. He did not meet her eyes. This was the hour of the evening when the machinery of the palace began to rattle a little. Trays returning to kitchens, footmen exchanging stations, music taking a slower turn. She reached the physician's door and lifted her hand to knock. Before she could touch wood, a voice inside the room slowed her hand in the air. "His Highness bears enough tonight," the woman said. "One does not pile pebbles on a full cart." Clara knew the voice. There were tones that one recognized first as fragrance, then as shape. Duchess Serafina did not need to declare herself in order to be known. Clara inclined her head toward the crack beside the latch. She had not meant to listen. She had come for the medicine Edmund should have in the next quarter hour. This was a digression she would not normally permit herself. But the word, "His Highness," sealed her to the door as if the wood had drawn her. "I am guided by my oath," the physician answered. "The child's exercises were prescribed for a reason." "And I am guided by mine," Serafina returned, "to safeguard the future of this house. The exercises are distressing to him. They exhaust him. I observed this morning how color fled his face. He is too weak to bear such demands. The muscles, if left idle, will rest," she said, "and in resting, preserve his strength for the duties he can bear. He is 6. He should not be subjected to rigor. The boy needs quiet, not strain. You will suspend his regimen for his safety." Clara pressed her palm to the panel. The wood was cool. She could name the exact crease in Edmund's brow when he took breath against pain. She could name the pattern of the blanket where his foot moved under it when he attempted to lift his knee. The exercises were difficult, but after them he slept with a peace she had not seen since the fall. The word "suspend" made the breath catch shallow in Clara's chest. "It is not my custom to alter a plan without consultation," the physician said. Serafina's pause was very slight. Clara felt the brief stillness of it more than she heard it. "When you first attended him, you told me privately, do you recall, that too much exertion, too early, can lead to harm. You advised caution. I am asking for caution. I will speak to the prince when he is free of tonight's obligations. In the meantime, you will follow my instruction. Send word to the staff that the boy is not to be pressed to stand. Remove what is unnecessary. He will rest." There was the gentle chime of glass on glass, the soft sound of something being set aside on a table. "A few days' rest," the physician tried. "Indefinitely," Serafina said, the word exact, the consonants placed as if she were setting stones in a path. "We will see how he fares." Clara's fingers curled against the door. A pulse in her wrist answered itself. She had known, as all the staff knew, that Serafina measured the palace and weighed it. She had not known this. She saw Edmund's face in her mind the way it looked when he felt he had failed. All his effort collapsed in a breath. She knew what the loss of a day meant for a body relearning how to ask. "The prince has requested progress," the physician said, more softly. "The prince will have peace," Serafina returned. "He is to be my husband. He cannot be pulled in pieces between a party and a sick room. It is not fit. If the child is kept quiet, His Highness can carry the weight expected of him." "Isn't that what we all want?" Clara did not realize she had backed a step until her heel touched the seam between two floorboards. She held very still so her dress would not whisper. She thought of the baby's cradle she had once rocked in a village house near her own. How the mother had told her that sometimes you must not move even to scratch your nose because the child would wake to the smallest sound. Quiet had felt like care there. Here, quiet sounded like erasure. "Very well," the physician said, the resignation in it the most dangerous part. I will put the message to the staff." "Thank you," Serafina said. "You serve the crown." Clara let her breath out and caught it again, as if it might make noise on the way. She stepped away from the door, smooth, practiced, as though she had been going to knock and something had detained her briefly. She did not wish to be found with her ear to wood. She adjusted her cap by touching it with 2 fingers and lowered her eyes the way the palace taught for invisibility. She knew how to vanish in plain sight. The physician's latch lifted. She moved to the side and bowed her head as he passed, his eyes on the flagstones in front of his feet. He did not see her, or he pretended not to. Inside the room, Serafina's shadow changed upon the floor as she turned. Clara looked at it and understood that shadows could command men more than light did. She went to the shelf where the medicine bottle stood, labeled in the physician's precise hand. Her fingers found the one that had soothed Edmund's breath the night before. She placed it in the cool of the crook of her arm, wrapped in a linen cloth. The movements were ordinary, the kind of ritual a life is built of. The enormity of what she had heard sat inside the ordinary and made it strange. A footman passed at the end of the corridor, his step adjusted to the court's music and the rhythm of the trays in his hands. Clara waited for him to turn the corner and then took the first step back toward the antechamber, keeping to the edge of the wall where the candle sconces left a strip of shadow. She counted the floorboards. She measured her breath so it would not shake. At the antechamber door, she paused. Through the finger's breadth left open, she could see the prince, still as a figure carved from darker wood, standing near his sleeping son. There was a line between his brows she had seen in Edmund when the boy dreamed of the horse. Clara put her hand to the latch and found her palm damp. In the great hall, the music rose again, bright and insistent, a flourish to call the next pattern. The sound pressed into the corridor like sea wind through a crack, lifting the edges of everything it touched. Voices gathered beyond, laughter layered over speculation, 100 minds arranging themselves around a future they wanted tidy. Clara's mind had no tidy place to put what she had heard. She could pretend she had misheard, which would be a relief sold too cheaply. She could go to the prince and speak, which would be a truth that could tumble her into the street before the night was out. She could do nothing, which would be a kind of doing that would not look like action, but would be a choice. She set her jaw. She curled her fingers farther around the bottle wrapped in linen, as if it were something like a vow she could hold. She drew in a long breath and blew it out slowly to smooth her voice if she had to use it. She pushed the door open. The prince turned toward her. His gaze went at once to her hands, to what she carried, and then to her face, and then back to the boy. He made room for her without stepping forward, a courtesy that let her reach Edmund easily. She crossed to the table, set the bottle down, and reached to adjust the pillow under the child's head. The child barely stirred. The heat of his skin met her palm and settled something in her ribs. She thought of Serafina's voice, calm as a judge placing a sentence. She thought of the physician's agreement. She did not speak of either. "What do you require?" Alaric asked, very low. "Only a moment," she answered. "He will rest better." He nodded. It was a simple gesture and a vast distance at once. His eyes went to the door, to the corridor beyond it, and then returned to Edmund. He did not know the new shaping of that corridor. He did not know that a word had been placed into it like a plank that would break when stepped on. Clara lifted the cup to Edmund's lips. The boy swallowed in sleep, the way children do when the body accepts without waking. The cup steadied in her hand. The room was steady around it. The music beyond swelled and broke and turned again. She counted the swallows and then set the cup aside. Serafina's perfume reached the doorway before she did, a cool drift that belonged to the ball, not to this small room. Clara kept her head lowered as the Duchess's silhouette took shape in the gap of the door. Alaric looked up, the smoothness of his face returning as if he had been practicing it when no one watched. Clara did not lift her eyes. She looked at Edmund's lashes, at the small freckle near his ear, at the line of light along the edge of the blanket where her hand held it. The Duchess's step was soundless on the threshold. Her presence changed the air the way a sudden draft does, lifting a wick's flame without extinguishing it. "Is the boy comfortable?" Serafina asked. "Sleeping," Alaric said. His voice fitted to the hall outside, to politics and pattern. "He needs quiet." Serafina inclined her head. The angle of it felt like a closing book. She put her hand delicately on the door as if to remind it what doors are meant to do. Clara held herself still. She said nothing. She learned the weight of her own silence, felt how it could be both shield and blade. The Duchess withdrew, leaving the faint curl of her scent as a ribbon hanging in the space where she had stood. The door remained a finger's breadth ajar. The hall kept singing. The candle kept steady. Edmund breathed. Clara stood in that balance and knew it would not hold. She understood, in a single cold peal of certainty, that the Duchess intended Edmund never to walk again. The candle's flame made a small blue core when the wick leaned from the passing air. Clara watched it steady and knew the stillness wouldn't last. In the low light, Edmund's breathing found a softer rhythm. The music from the great hall thinned, the end of a tune held too long by musicians waiting for a sign that would not come. She did not move from the boy's side until his features smoothed, until the worry that had pulled between his brows released by a finger's width. She had heard every word in the physician's chamber. The sound of Serafina's voice lived now in her chest like something lodged there. Suspend. Indefinitely. Remove what is unnecessary. She folded the linen around the medicine bottle again and placed it on the table as if it could protect him by its square of cloth alone. "Thank you," the prince said, quiet, so as not to brush the air too hard. Clara inclined her head. Speech felt dangerous. The words she held were heavy, and if she set them down now they would crash, and the sound would carry. Serafina's presence had retreated, but not her intention. The antechamber felt altered, like a room after a promise made in it late at night. Clara adjusted Edmund's blanket and kept her hands visible, steady, precise. She sensed Alaric watching not only his son, but the way she moved around him, the way she tracked the little noises when the boy stirred. "Will he wake?" Alaric asked. "If the music keeps," she said. "Perhaps not." The music did not keep. The piece changed. The players paused. The murmur of the hall rose and then shortened, as if the room itself became conscious of its own voice. Footsteps carried down the corridor. A servant's cough was swallowed quickly. The door remained a finger's breadth open. Everything felt just slightly ajar. Clara wanted to speak, to set the truth between them as plainly as linen on a table, but her mind ran through consequences the way someone might count coins with cold fingers. A maid leveling accusation against a future duchess would not end by the boy's bedside. It would end in the street. Edmund shifted, a soft protest in his throat that baked her indecision into something firmer. She lifted the cup to his lips again, though he had no need, just to do a thing that helped. He swallowed without waking. The small accomplishment steadied her. Alaric's gaze lifted toward the hall. "I must return," he said, a man speaking to his own duty as if it were someone waiting for him on the other side of a threshold. "I will stay," she answered. "He will not be alone." He paused, as if to say a word that had no place here, then nodded. The light touched the line of his jaw when he turned. For a breath, the room held the shape of his absence before filling back around the bed. The sounds of the hall reached fuller into the corridor as he moved away, as though they followed him. Clara stood until the music blurred into the late hour. The frequency of laughter changed. It came softer now, more tired and pleased with itself. She set a fresh cloth by Edmund's forehead and let her eyes close just long enough to count to 3 and pretend she was the only person in the palace. When she opened them, the candle had guttered a fraction, the wax making a small white rim at the base. She trimmed the wick with the shear on the table and shook the spare sliver into the dish. The hall's noise receded by degrees. Chairs scraped, well-bred voices carried farewells. The air shifted as doors were opened and shut. Somewhere a glass struck stone and did not break. The great celebration folded itself into quiet meanings that would be retold in the morning as something brighter than it was. Clara folded a spare blanket and set it at the foot of the chaise. The fatigue that found her shoulders was the kind that made a person dull, but she knew the dullness would not keep her from hearing Edmund the moment his breath changed. She sat in the chair beside him and let her hands rest on her skirts, palms open to keep them from clenching. Serafina's instruction had not yet been carried to staff, not officially, not in a way that could be resisted. It was a thought in the air, and thoughts travel quicker than men. Clara steadied her own thought against it. She would do what she always did in the first hour after fear: wait, listen, tend. And when light came, she would place herself where she could see what changed. The last of the music went thin as a reed and vanished. The candle sank another notch. Edmund murmured and turned his face toward her hand. She let her fingers find his hair and smoothed it back. The motion told her more than it soothed him. His temperature had settled to near normal. His cheeks were not so stark. She counted the time between each breath. She counted to know the shape of the next hour. Through the cracked door, the corridor accepted the lack of celebration and became itself again. A footman's step slowed to its service pace. A woman's laugh, not a lady's, cut off when she realized where she was. Someone snuffed wall sconces, taking the light down in polite increments. The palace put itself to bed. Clara stayed until the boy's breathing deepened. When she finally rose to stretch her back, the room felt as if it gave a little sigh with her. The first gray in the window seam came almost without her noticing. Dawn pushed at the edges of the room with the gentleness of a hand trying not to wake a child. She damped the wick, fed the flame, and felt the small relief of seeing it strengthen. She did not like shadows full of intention. The morning began to speak. A clatter from the courtyard far below, voices where the kitchens came to life, the distant move of a broom. The light in the antechamber went from candle to ash, pale. Edmund slept through it. Clara changed the water in the basin using slow, practiced steps, as if slowness might convince time to be courteous. Serafina came early. She entered with the confidence of someone who had chosen her hour and would not be moved from it. Her gown had changed. The color found light more aggressively now. It did not flutter. She laid one hand on the door and let it close behind her, the latch making a small sound like consent. She looked at Edmund. Then she looked at Clara. "How has the night been?" Serafina asked. "Cooler," Clara said, watching the Duchess's fingers more than her face. "And the prince?" Serafina's glance at the boy softened by a measured degree, as if she had practiced that softness. "He kept the hall content until late. He has carried all that is required of him." Clara thought of the moment when he had stood, still as a carved figure, and then left. "He returned to the ball," she said, not offering more. Serafina crossed to the end of the chaise and stood where Clara stood when she counted breaths. She did not reach toward Edmund, which was the only kindness Clara trusted in this moment. There was a pause in which one could believe they loved the same thing differently. Then Serafina's breath lengthened, and with it, purpose returned. "The boy needs rest," she said, addressing the room as much as Clara. "You will ensure the chamber remains quiet. Remove the instruments that remind him of strain. We shall not have him agitated." Clara's fingers pressed discreetly into the side seam of her skirt so they would not betray themselves. "The physician prescribed—" "The physician will be reminded," Serafina cut gently, like a teacher ending a childish argument. "He spoke of caution, and we will apply it. Send word to the staff who attend here that the regimen is paused. Make the room fit for convalescence, not endurance. He is 6. The number 6 hovered between them the way a blade's edge gleams. Clara let the blade reveal the thought behind it without showing that her chest had tightened to keep from speaking its name. "Very well," Clara said, keeping her voice where status required. "I will send word." Serafina turned toward the door but stopped part way, her gaze taking in the small wooden chest beneath the window where the braces were kept. the cane standing sentinel beside the chair, the cloths folded for their use. "Everything unnecessary," she said. "Quiet is the first physician. We must not displease it with clatter." She left. The room was all at once too loud in its quiet. Clara stood so still it hurt the tendons in the backs of her knees. She breathed and made each breath deliberate. She had to measure obedience the way one measured flour for bread. Exact, or the loaf fell. Disobedience too visible would end more than a morning's work. But she would not help a lie. She would not carry out an order that undid the boy's chance. She crossed to the door and sent for a footman with a message for the attending staff. The room to be kept calm, visits limited, no loud talk. She kept the note clean of the word suspend. She returned to Edmund's side and checked his pulse, as if by that act alone she could guarantee his day. The beat met her thumb and told her to make the next small decision. Alaric arrived as if drawn by that decision. Morning light had found his face and made it look more unadorned. He stood at the threshold and looked first at his son, then at Clara, then at the cane by the chair. Something like apology flashed and was erased. "Serafina has informed me," he said, a phrase that carried the court in its pocket. "She will supervise Edmund's care more closely. There is concern that exertion has overtaxed him. There will be adjustments, temporarily." Clara's heart did what the candle had done in the night. It leaned and then righted itself. She did not let her gaze leave Edmund's face. "He slept," she said. The quiet helped. "I am glad," Alaric answered, and the small sincerity of it landed and stayed, complicating everything. "I have audience. I will return." He looked as if he would say more, then did not. He let his hand hover above Edmund's blanket and drew it back before the hover turned into touch. Duty took him by the sleeve and led him out. Clara watched the door after he left, not trusting it to remain only wood. Servants answered her message through the morning with a dozen small streamings of activity. They checked the tray on the table and reset it because the edge offended them. They brought fresh water and took away the old with a formality that made waste seem ceremonial. They asked with their eyes whether the Duchess had spoken. She gave what answer was safe by not giving any. When the physician came, he did not stay. He glanced at Edmund, declaimed that rest would be prudent, and left a note folded and sealed for Serafina instead of instructions at the bedside. Clara felt the vacuum of instruction like a wind pulling at the door. She made the room quiet out of what she could control. She prevented unnecessary visits. She allowed only the gentlest light. She kept the cane near because its presence told the boy something about the world that words could not. That standing was expected of him someday. That tools existed to make it possible. That there was a shape to reach for. She did not touch it. She knew another's hand would. By noon, the palace had resumed its bright face. In the antechamber, the brightness was the enemy. Edmund woke, ate a little, and fell back asleep with his hand resting on the edge of the blanket, fingers curved as if around the memory of the cane's grip. Clara watched the hand and thought how objects become a language before a child can read. Serafina did not return until the light had begun to go gold. She brought with her 2 attendants whose eyes flicked over Clara and then away. Her voice carried the kind of cheer one hears in sick rooms from visitors who stop on their way to another appointment. "We can do better for him," Serafina said, surveying the chest, the chair, the cane. "He is to have calm. Remove the provoking things." Clara met the eyes of the nearest attendant only long enough to be understood, without having to say the order aloud. The woman moved with obedient efficiency toward the chest. The man reached for the cane. "No," Clara said before she knew her voice had left her, and then corrected. "The cane steadies him when he stands from bed." "He will not be standing," Serafina said, the cheer gone from her words without her having to darken them. "Not today." The man took the cane. It looked longer and more meaningful in his hand than it ever had leaning against the chair. He turned to carry it out and hesitated at the door, as if waiting for permission to remove a piece of a child's future. Permission came in Serafina's lack of concern. The chest opened with a wooden sigh. The braces inside were wrapped loosely in linen from the last time they were used. The attendant lifted them as one lifts a sleeping child, careful, as if to prove that kindness can be practiced even while doing harm. The cloth shifted and exposed the leather straps. A faint smell of oil rose into the room. Edmund stirred, a change in breath that only those near him would notice. Clara stood very straight, as if posture could make her taller, as if tallness could alter fact. She did not move to block the door. She kept her hands at her sides where she could see them and not mistrust them. Serafina watched it all with the smooth interest of someone rearranging a room to suit a different use. "He will thank us when he wakes," she said, and then the smallest lift of one shoulder suggested even she did not intend to wait for that gratitude. When they were gone, the space beside the chair looked naked. The absence made the room lopsided. Clara could not stop her eyes from going to it and finding nothing to anchor them. Afternoon went to evening in unremarkable acts: the lowering of light, the lengthening of shadow, the second measure of broth that Edmund refused and then took, the slow thread of waiting that pulls at patience and makes it hum like wire between posts. Clara counted the strokes of the clock, inaudible from here by how often the corridor filled and emptied. She had learned the palace's means of keeping time without clocks. She could tell the hour by the kitchen's rattles, the courtiers' tides, the bellows of the fireplaces in the next hall. She sent word to no one. Words now were more dangerous than silence. She thought of Alaric's face when Serafina had told him the morning's plan. She wondered at the kind of man who would fear breaking the appearance that kept the kingdom steady, when breaking it might be the only steady thing left. She did not resent him. Resentment is a luxury. She had work. Night drew its boundary at the window, a blue that became black, where the glass met stone. The room narrowed to candlelight and breath. Footsteps diminished to the footfalls of those who must move in darkness. A bat's thin cry from the courtyard below made a line through the quiet and vanished. Edmund slept fitfully, as he did when his legs ached and had no task to make the ache mean something. He reached for the space where the cane had been. His hand found air and closed on it, and he sighed and did not wake. Clara rose and did nothing. Some absences cannot be comforted. She waited until his sleep deepened again. Then she moved without the want of noise. She crossed to the chest and set her hand on its lid. The wood was cooler now. She lifted it slowly. Inside, folded cloths lay where the braces had lain. Beneath them, emptiness, exact and neat. The leather straps were gone, the polished metal gone, the faint oil smell a ghost that embarrassed her for expecting more than ghosts. She smoothed a hand over the cloth, as if a shape might impress itself upward from beneath, but there was nothing to press. She turned to the chair. The space where the cane had stood was only air measuring itself against wood. The indent at the baseboard where its tip had rested was a small, stupid proof that vanished when the light shifted. She looked toward the door as if the object might return by deciding to. The corridor's breath met her face, indifferent. She closed the chest and felt the small weight of its lid settle with finality. She stood with both hands on it for a long breath, a kind of prayer that had no words. Somewhere beyond the door, 2 servants passed, voices low, carrying the rhythm of people at the end of a long day who do not want to be noticed. Clara listened to them go. It told her the hour. It told her she had no witnesses. She crossed back to Edmund and arranged his blanket, not because it needed arranging, but because action had to find a place. Her hands shook now, a thing she had prevented all day. She set them on the mattress until the tremor left. She kept her eyes on the boy, so the room would stop swinging. When she finally let her gaze return to the emptied corner, it did not soften what she saw. It clarified it. The chest gaped where the tools had been, and the cane was gone. Clara did not sleep. The room had lost its shape when the cane left it, and she kept watch like a sailor who knows the reef is there even when the water looks calm. Edmund woke near dawn, a little sound that would have disappeared into the great house if someone had not been waiting to hear it. She leaned close. "Thirsty?" she whispered. He nodded and swallowed with his eyes half closed. When she set the cup aside, he held her sleeve. "Do your feet ache?" she asked. "A little," he said, the brave lie a child offers to be good. She looked at the chest, at the space that should not have been a space. She looked back at him. "Would you try something quiet for me?" she asked. "We won't make noise, just you and I." He blinked, curious in that solemn way that had made her love him without permission. "What?" "Press your foot into my hand and count to 3. She slipped her palm under the blanket and set it at the sole of his foot. The warmth of him met her skin. He pressed. It was barely more than a thought of pressure, but it was there. 1, she said softly. 2, 3. Good. He smiled, the small lightening that brightened his whole face. "Again?" "If you like." They did it once more, then rested. She watched the pulse jump at his temple, counted the breaths until his chest steadied. "Now, pull your toes toward your knee. Slowly. I'll help." She put the edge of her other hand at his toes, and he tried. His breath caught. She let him stop before the catch became a cry. "This is secret," he said, a whisper like a thread. She heard the danger in the word and did not like it, but she nodded. "It is ours. Because we are careful." They went in small measures. Press, rest, bend, rest. She placed her hand at his knee and asked him to think of lifting without lifting, to send the message along the path. He frowned with all his might. The muscle quivered under her fingers. The quiver was victory. A knock sounded far in the corridor, and both their heads turned as if the sound were in the room. She waited. The sound did not come nearer. She breathed again. He grew tired quickly. She recognized the look that meant she had asked enough. "That is work done," she said, smoothing the blanket. "The kind of work no one hears." He made an approving sound, already half closed again. She rose to fetch the basin and wrung out a cloth. When she laid the cool square across his shins, the relief in him was plain. "The quiet helps," she said, for herself as much as him. A shadow crossed the door. She did not startle. She lifted the cloth and set it aside before the prince entered. He paused at the threshold, as if the room required permission of him like a person. His face looked newer than it had at night, stripped of court light. "How is he?" Alaric asked. "Steadier," she said. "The fever has not returned." His gaze moved to Edmund's feet under the blanket, then to Clara's hands. "You kept watch." "I did," she answered. "He does better when someone he knows is near." Alaric stepped closer. "I've come to sit with him before the day begins." Clara made room and watched him take the chair by Edmund's pillow. He did not touch the boy yet. He placed his hand flat on the edge of the cushion, as if testing whether the chair would hold him. The gesture tugged something at her ribs. "You were in the hall late," she said. "I was," he replied, the word holding more fatigue than he would show anyone else. "It has not ended, not really." "The night?" she asked. "The performance," he said lightly, and then his voice changed because the boy sighed and turned toward the sound of him. "Good morning, Edmund." Edmund blinked up, gathered his father's voice like a toy he knew, and smiled. "Morning." The child's eyes were clearer. Alaric saw it at once. He leaned forward, and for a moment there was no palace, only a father and a son and a woman who had kept the watch that made this daylight possible. "You look less troubled," Alaric said. "Clara sat," Edmund answered, as if that explained the weather, and perhaps it did. Alaric looked at Clara. She lowered her eyes because sometimes looking back is too much. His gratitude found her anyway. It sat warm under her breastbone, low and steady. There was movement in the hall, a footman's even step, a woman's voice at the far end, not of rank. The day had started, and it would have its demands. Alaric drew in a breath that seemed not to fit inside him properly. "Would fresh air suit him?" he asked. Clara weighed the question as if it were a cup of something hot being passed over the boy's bed. "If we go slowly," she said. "The sun is not yet high." He nodded. "I will send for a chair." "No," she said, and then added, careful, "If we carry him between us, he is less displayed." The word cost her, but she would not put him on show like a tray of fruit. "It will be quieter." Alaric glanced at the door, considering the eyes that door leads to. "We will go by the side passage," he decided. "No one will notice." He turned to Edmund. "Shall we see the garden?" "Yes," Edmund said, bright now. "The one with the clipped trees." Clara folded the blanket back. "We will put your cloak," she said. "It is cool." They moved with the competence of people who had both lifted sleeping children and carried burdens heavier than they looked. Alaric slid one arm under Edmund's back and the other beneath his knees. Clara steadied the boy's shoulders and held the trailing edge of the cloak. Edmund's small hand caught at Alaric's collar, and the prince's breath changed. They stood as one, and for 3 heartbeats, it felt like a prayer that had no words. The corridor outside was empty. The light from the high windows fell in rectangles on the floor, which made their passage feel like moving through time cut into careful lengths. They went by the servants' way, a route Clara knew as well as she knew the seams of her apron, not because she wished to hide, but because it hurt less to meet fewer eyes. They passed the hush that hangs outside storerooms, the smell of soap and beeswax, and the little cold caught in the stone where the morning had not yet warmed it. At the garden door, the latch lifted, and the outer air laid a hand on their faces. It smelled of earth that had been turned, and of sun licking at damp leaves. The trimmed yews, shaped into obedient walls, kept the wind from nagging. The fountain whispered in the center of the path. Everything here was made to look like ease, which is a kind of labor. They set Edmund upon a bench, warmed by the early light. He sighed as if he had been set in a bowl of gentleness. Clara arranged the cloak over his legs so the air could touch his face, but not steal his heat. Alaric stood a pace away, hands momentarily lost, as men's hands sometimes are when the thing they love is not a sword or a paper. "Shall we count birds?" Edmund asked, tilting his head toward a sparrow that did not fly when they came near. "We shall," Alaric said, glad for any task the day did not invent. Clara stepped back. She let father and son name the ordinary miracles. She watched the prince look softer here. The garden pressed less on his shoulders. He did not wear the hall. He wore the mourning. "Your Highness," she said after a time, when the sparrow had become 2, then 3, and the boy's eyes had found a restfulness that meant the world could ask a little more of him. "May I try something with him, if we do not hurry?" Alaric turned to her. He did not answer at once. The refusal he owed to someone else rose, and then fell. "What?" "Only to let him stand," she said, "with the bench at his back, my hands at his sides. Not long." He looked at Edmund. The boy had heard the word stand. It found him and filled him with a want that shook even the pretense of being well-behaved. "Please," Edmund said, in the tone children use when they hope to enlarge the world by asking, not demanding. Alaric nodded. Gently. The single word had weight and trust inside it. Clara took her place. She moved as if performing a rite. "We will do it slowly," she murmured to Edmund. "We press your feet down together. We count. I am here." She set one hand at his waist and the other just above his knee. The wood of the bench gave him a place to lean without thinking about leaning. Edmund's fingers found the edge and held. His face tightened. "1," she said, and felt his legs speak to her through her hands. 2. He pulled his chin down with the effort. 3. He rose not in a dramatic lift but by degrees, the way mornings become afternoon. His feet found the ground heel first, then the ball of the foot. There was a moment when he could have stopped and mended all their resolve with harmless cowardice. He did not. He pushed an inch more, and then he was standing. He made a small sound, surprised by his own height. Alaric's hand hovered, then steadied without touching, close enough to catch. He stood like that, as if he could hold the air under his son. "That is enough," Clara said, before pride could become pain. "Sit." He sank back with a ragged breath and a smile that made lines at the corners of his eyes he had not earned by age. He looked at the bench as if it were a friend that had just told him a story ending well. "Again?" he asked too quickly. "We will rest, and then again," Clara said, and the way she said it made it sound like a treasure guarded for him. Alaric exhaled. He had not been aware he had been keeping the air inside him like a secret. He looked at Clara. Their eyes met and did not travel away as quickly as they should have. It was a look that would not be written in any account of the day. It was too quiet to capture. But it turned in his chest like a key. "Thank you," he said, and it was not court thanks. It was the kind that makes the person who hears it feel seen and exposed in the same breath. "I serve," she replied, because the world they were in had words for this, and they were not the ones she would have chosen. They tried again after a pause. The second stand was shorter. Edmund swayed. Alaric reached out an inch and drew back an inch. Clara steadied him with the heel of her hand pressed just so. The boy sat with a soft groan, already proud. Sunlight made a bright line along his hair. A gardener passed at the far end of the hedge walk and did not turn his head. The fountain kept speaking, as if reminding them that water too learns the shape of its container, and still finds ways to move. The palace, beyond the clipped walls, breathed without them for a while. It felt impossible and right that the three of them could exist here, a pocket of intention in a day that would consume intention like bread. "May I try to make my toes touch the path?" Edmund asked. "You may try to think of it," Clara said. "We will not force." He lowered his eyes to his feet, which were not visible beneath the cloak, and made a face of deep concentration. It was comical and holy. Alaric smiled before he could stop himself. The smile drew Clara's gaze, as surely as if he had called her name. She had not been prepared for how handsome he looked when he was not worrying. It was a gentle, dangerous knowledge. She looked away quickly, but the knowledge stayed. It warmed the parts of her that cold had taken. "You should not have to be brave alone," Alaric said, too quietly for anyone but her to hear, and the words jumped the usual path between ranks. "I see what you do." She did not let her face change. She let her voice do it. "He does most of it," she said. "I only give him a wall to lean on until he doesn't need it." He nodded once. A grave agreement that felt like a vow might be made of it, if they let it be. He did not move closer. Neither did she. A breeze made the "you" whisper and lifted a lock of Edmund's hair. The moment stretched thin and held. "Again?" Edmund asked, already bargaining with his own strength. "One more," Clara said. "Then we go in." This time, when he pushed, his knees trembled. He used his hands more on the bench. He rose not quite fully and sat again almost at once. He looked disappointed. She touched the back of his hand with 2 fingers. "That was wise," she said, knowing when to stop his work too. Alaric listened to the words and felt the part of him that had been told all his life not to stop, not to show need, not to concede, begin to understand a different kind of strength. A door clicked open somewhere above the terrace. It was not loud, but it was the sound of a hinge that had been opened by someone who felt entitled to its turn. Alaric felt it in his bones before he identified it. He straightened. Clara did not turn at once. She refused to give the presence the gift of her attention too quickly. She adjusted Edmund's cloak. She moved the corner to a better angle. She placed her hand at his shoulder and let him feel the steadiness there, as if steadiness were contagious. Then she looked up. Serafina stood on the balcony that overlooked the garden, one hand upon the stone, her posture perfectly easy, as if the world had arranged itself to match her line. Her gaze took in the bench, the boy, the prince, the maid's hand where it rested, and the distance between each. The light did not soften her. It revealed her as she was. Alaric's jaw tightened by a measure no one in the hall would have noticed. Here, a sparrow would have. Clara held still. Edmund, sensing the way adults turned to stone, looked from one face to the other and did not know what he had done wrong. No one spoke. The fountain's whisper sounded suddenly like a secret being told in a room that had promised to keep it. Seraphina's eyes, steady as scales, weighed what she saw and found in it something that woke her interest like hunger. She did not call down. She did not smile. She simply looked, and looking, laid claim to the next hour with a patience that meant trouble. On the balcony above, Seraphina watched them, and the cool, measuring light in her eyes promised that this would not be allowed. The garden air cooled as if Seraphina's gaze had chilled it. Her stillness on the balcony carried more threat than if she had spoken. Clara drew her hand from Edmund's shoulder with deliberate calm, as though the touch had been nothing but adjustment. Alaric's expression did not change, though a faint muscle pulled at the corner of his jaw. The boy looked up, puzzled by the quiet, but obediently stayed seated. Seraphina did not descend. She turned away from the stone rail with poise, leaving only the faint rustle of her gown against the carved balustrade. The silence she left behind clung to the garden longer than her presence had. Alaric straightened, his hand tightening at the back of the bench. "We should return," he said, the words sounding like duty spoken aloud. Clara nodded. She wrapped Edmund's cloak more firmly around him. The boy resisted with a small frown. "But I was not tired yet." "You have done enough," Clara said gently. "You must keep strength for tomorrow." Alaric lifted his son once more, careful as though the child were made of glass. Clara steadied the edge of the cloak again. Together they retraced their path through the side passage. Their footsteps struck against the stone more sharply than before, the quiet no longer protective, but echoing like accusation. Back in the antechamber, Edmund was laid on the chaise. He relaxed, relieved by the familiar space. Clara arranged the blanket while Alaric stood in the shadow, his hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed upon nothing. The air between them carried the weight of the balcony scene. Clara spoke first, softly, not to break the boy's half-sleep. She saw. "Yes." Alaric's voice was measured, but it carried strain. "And she will not forgive it." "She will use it," Clara said, daring to meet his eyes, "in whatever way gains her favor." His gaze flicked to his son, then back. "The court already favors her. They are eager for security." "And a maid's word against a duchess," Clara said, low, "is not security." His silence admitted it. His face revealed nothing, yet his stillness seemed more revealing than motion. Clara lowered her head and returned to the boy's side, though her pulse still raced. Later that evening, summons came. Clara was ordered to attend Seraphina in her apartments. She left Edmund asleep, promising the boy with a touch to his hand that she would return swiftly. Alaric remained in the room, a silent guardian. Seraphina's chambers glowed with candlelight reflected from tall mirrors. She stood before the glass, unpinning a jewel from her hair, the delicate act performed with deliberate slowness. Clara curtsied and waited. "You enjoy the garden," Seraphina said at last, her tone smooth. "It was for the boy's health," Clara answered. "Health," Seraphina repeated, a smile grazing her lips. "Is it healthy to encourage illusions, to set him on his feet when he should be still? I'm told you favor exertion." Clara kept her eyes lowered. "I favor hope." "Hope," Seraphina echoed again, sharper now. "Hope will break him." She turned from the mirror, her gaze landing full on Clara. "And it will break you, if you persist." Clara clasped her hands tightly to still them. "I serve the prince's son." "You serve me," Seraphina corrected, stepping closer. "Soon I will be his mother. You forget your place." Clara held her ground, though her heart pounded. "The boy needs care." Serafina's eyes glittered. You mistake care for ambition. A maid seeking to be noticed above her station. Dangerous. Her voice softened. Take care, Clara. The palace does not forgive presumption. Clara bent her head, murmured the required submission, and withdrew before her defiance betrayed her further. The following day, whispers began. Servants in the corridor glanced at Clara, then looked away. A chambermaid avoided her entirely. 2 guards paused their conversation when she passed. The air around her thickened with unspoken suspicion. By noon, she was called before the steward. His words were precise, stripped of emotion. There are concerns. Some allege you have encouraged the child against orders, neglecting his true needs. Clara felt the sting of it, but spoke evenly. I have never neglected him. The steward's eyes slid away. The Duchess believes otherwise. Back in the antechamber, Clara found Edmund restless. He asked for the cane, forgetting it was gone. She smoothed his blanket, offering comfort in tone if not in truth. Alaric entered soon after, reading the unease in her face before she spoke. They mean to remove me, Clara whispered when Edmund dozed again. He looked at the child, then at her. His voice was taut. You will remain. I will not permit dismissal without cause. You cannot fight her openly, Clara said, searching his face. Perhaps not, he admitted. His gaze lingered on her longer than propriety allowed, carrying something unspoken, gratitude, regret, desire mingled in a breath. Then he stepped back into composure. But I will delay it. That evening, Serafina struck again. In the presence of courtiers, she spoke with practiced sorrow of a maid whose negligence had caused Edmund unnecessary distress. She told the tale as though she had borne witness herself. The courtiers nodded, lips pursed in sympathy. Clara's name passed among them like a blemish noticed on a fine cloth. Word reached Alaric quickly. He found Clara in the corridor outside Edmund's room, her face pale but steady. She did not need to tell him what had been said. The anger in his eyes already knew. You must be cautious, Clara said quietly. She will not stop. And you? He asked. I cannot stop either, she replied, the truth laid bare. The corridor fell silent. He studied her face, the tremor she tried to hide, the strength beneath it. He drew a breath as though to speak more, then glanced at the door where his son slept and held his tongue. The silence stretched, charged. Clara turned away first, retreating into the antechamber, her body shaking only when the door closed behind her. That night, Serafina met privately with the physician once more. Clara, passing on an errand, paused when she caught the faint murmur of voices through the half-open door. She dared one step closer. Make it clear to the prince, Serafina instructed, her voice low but cutting. If the boy is pressed again, his life may be in danger. He must fear the cost of exertion. The physician's hesitant reply blurred into silence, but the order was plain. Clara pressed her back to the cold stone, her breath caught. The weight of what she had heard pinned her where she stood. She knew then that Serafina's hand would stretch further, reaching for Edmund's very life to secure her hold. Clara's blood ran cold as she realized the Duchess had planted the seed that training could kill the boy. The great hall was set for display. Garland wound around the marble columns, their pale stones softened by ribbons of green and gold. Musicians tuned in the gallery, the sound of strings stretching into readiness. The banquet was no ordinary feast. It had been called to honor the prince's engagement, to let the kingdom see harmony displayed in wine, laughter, and candlelight. Prince Alaric sat at the head of the long table, posture precise, face trained to give the impression of contentment. His eyes swept the company, marking who smiled too broadly, who whispered too quickly, who drank with suspicion. But his attention returned always to the small chair beside him, where Edmund sat with his feet barely touching the carpet. The boy's cheeks were pale, but his gaze restless, eager to be part of the world that spun so far above his reach. Clara stood behind Edmund as she always did, ready with a cloth or a cup. She felt the weight of the room press against her back. Whispers had followed her for days, and though no word was spoken aloud tonight, she knew the company saw her not merely as a servant, but as a shadow to be measured against the Duchess's light. The first courses were served: platters of roast fowl, bowls of sugared fruits, dishes spiced with saffron filled the table. The nobles ate with deliberate delight, praising Serafina's grace, the king's foresight, and the future of the realm. Edmund lifted a piece of bread, chewing slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he set it back down. Clara noticed. She leaned closer. "You may rest if you wish," she murmured. "I want to stay," he said, the determination in his small voice piercing her heart. Serafina's voice rose from further down the table, carrying easily. "It is such joy to see the prince's son present tonight. He grows strong under our care." The courtiers murmured agreement. Alaric inclined his head, though his expression remained unreadable. Clara felt the boy stiffen under the weight of being mentioned, his lips pressed together. He shifted in his chair, and when he looked up, there was a decision already forming in his eyes. Moments later, when the musicians began a lighter tune, Edmund pushed his hands against the table's edge and tried to stand. Clara reached instinctively to steady him, but he shook his head. He wanted to do it himself. Slowly his legs found the ground, thin and trembling. The cane was gone, but his will was fierce. The nobles turned to watch. The sight of the small heir rising unsteadily from his chair pulled gasps from throats that had been full of laughter a heartbeat before. A murmur swept the length of the table. Clara placed her hand an inch from his back, ready but not holding. "One step," she whispered, so low only he heard. He nodded, jaw clenched. He shifted one foot forward, then the other. His knees trembled like reeds in wind, but he moved. He took 3 small steps into the open space beside the table. The hall erupted in astonishment. The musicians faltered. Edmund swayed, and Clara reached out, steadying him before he could fall. She looked down at him with quiet pride, her eyes shining with relief. It was Serafina who broke the silence, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. "Reckless." She rose, her gown sweeping like a flame. "This is cruelty, disguised as hope. The child is fragile, and yet you push him into danger before the entire court." Her eyes locked on Clara. Negligence, plain and unforgivable. The assembly shifted instantly, eyes darting, measuring the accusation. Several nobles nodded solemnly, murmuring praise for Serafina's vigilance. Their voices turned sympathy toward her, admiration for her supposed protection of the boy. Alaric rose part way, but the movement stopped in his throat. His hands tightened on the table. Every eye turned to him, waiting to see if he would defend the maid or confirm the Duchess. He looked at Edmund, then at Clara, then at Serafina, whose gaze dared him to contradict her. Clara stood in silence, her arm still steadying the boy. Her cheeks burned. She could not speak without shattering her place entirely, and silence itself felt like a confession. Edmund whispered, "I wanted to," but his words were swallowed by the noise of the room, the courtiers speaking over one another, eager to show loyalty to the Duchess's indignation. Serafina placed a hand to her heart, her voice trembling now with well-practiced sorrow. "I could not bear to see him endangered again. This cannot be allowed to continue. The child must be safe." Applause rose in pockets of the hall, polite but real. Serafina bowed her head, the perfect image of noble sacrifice, her eyes bright as if she had won a contest no one else had realized they were playing. Alaric sat again. He did not speak. The silence he kept felt like surrender, though in truth it was calculation. Clara saw only that she had been left unshielded before the court. She lowered her gaze, biting back the rush of words that would undo her completely. Edmund leaned into her side, his small hand clutching her sleeve. The feast continued. Laughter returned, though tighter, less natural. Clara kept her face composed, but her stomach twisted. When she turned to fetch a napkin for the boy, something at the edge of the table caught her eye. A small piece of parchment had slipped from the physician's satchel, left carelessly near a pile of papers. She bent swiftly, retrieving it under the guise of smoothing the cloth. She tucked it into her apron without reading, her heart hammering. Only when the boy settled again did she dare to glance at it. The wax seal was unmistakable, Serafina's crest pressed into red. Alaric noticed her movement. His eyes narrowed slightly, not at her, but at what she now concealed. He excused himself from the table a few minutes later, citing fatigue, and the courtiers murmured understanding. The celebration resumed, but Clara felt every whisper cling to her like smoke. In his chamber, Alaric unfolded the parchment. It was a letter, curt and commanding, written in Serafina's hand. The order was plain. All therapeutic exercises for Edmund were to be discontinued immediately, under threat of worsening his health. It was dated from the day the regimen had been altered. Alaric's pulse quickened. He sat at his desk, the letter trembling between his fingers. His mind ran through the memory of Clara's steadiness, her quiet defiance, her certainty that Edmund could recover. And now the proof lay in his hands, damning in its clarity. He closed his eyes for a long moment, fighting the instinct to rise and storm into the hall. His duty chained him to silence, but the truth in the letter threatened to break it. He gripped the parchment tighter, the seal cracking beneath his thumb. The weight of the court's voices still echoed in his ears, their applause for Serafina, their condemnation of Clara. Yet here, alone, he held the key that could undo them all. The door creaked behind him. He turned swiftly, hiding the letter within his coat. It was Clara, her face pale, her voice quiet. "Is he asleep?" she asked, meaning Edmund. "Yes," Alaric said, his voice strained. She studied him, her eyes catching the edge of what he concealed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them swelled with everything that could not yet be said. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she stopped herself. Instead, she inclined her head, turned, and left the chamber. Alaric exhaled once, long and heavy. He pulled the letter back into the light, staring at the damning seal, his mind already caught between revelation and ruin. His hand shook as he realized the Duchess's deception had been written and sealed in her own hand. The letter weighed heavy in Alaric's coat, as if parchment alone could bend his spine. He paced the chamber, the quiet broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. The seal bore her crest. The words bore her hand. Yet in his mind echoed the sound of nobles applauding Serafina's protection of Edmund, their voices binding him to silence. He pressed the paper flat on his desk again, staring at the ink as though sheer will might force it to accuse her aloud. A knock broke through the silence. Serafina entered without waiting for permission. Her face was serene, the very image of composed affection. She moved across the room with slow elegance, the silk of her gown sighing against itself. "You left the feast too soon," she said. The guests wondered. "I had enough," Alaric replied evenly, keeping his hand near the letter without drawing attention to it. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing with false concern. "The child's display unsettled you. It unsettled us all." "It unsettled them because they saw courage," he answered. Her smile was sharp, though it passed quickly. "It was dangerous. He is fragile. You know this, and yet she pushes him." Her voice dropped. "Clara courts disaster. That girl is reckless." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Or she believes in him." "Belief will not knit bones," Serafina said, stepping closer. Her perfume carried the sharpness of lilies. "You have heard the whispers. She has endangered him. It is plain. She must be dismissed before harm comes." He looked at her, long enough for the silence to weigh on her poise. Then he said, "I will consider what is best for my son." The faintest flash crossed her eyes, but she bowed her head as though in acceptance. "I trust you will choose wisely, for him, and for the kingdom." She left, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alaric sat, pulling the letter once more into the light. He wanted to stride into the king's presence with the evidence and see Serafina undone. But the court would not forgive rashness. Without witnesses, it would be her word against a maid's, and against his. The fire cracked, throwing sparks against the grate. His hand curled into a fist. He whispered to the empty room, "How long can silence guard him?" Across the palace, Clara moved swiftly through the servants' passage, her face pale, her steps light. She had been summoned again, this time not by the Duchess, but by the steward who spoke with icy detachment. "The Duchess brings grave concern," he told her. "It is said you endanger the boy with your methods. She urges that you be removed." Clara's throat closed, but her voice did not tremble. "If I go, who will guard him?" "The Duchess will," the steward answered. Her hands clasped tightly at her skirts, pressing her knuckles white. "Then God help him." The steward stiffened. "Mind your tongue. The prince has not yet spoken, but the decision may not be in your favor." Dismissed, Clara returned to Edmund's chamber, her heart pounding. The boy stirred at once when he saw her. "You came back," he whispered. "I will always come back," she said, smoothing his hair. She sat beside him, her hand resting near his. She knew each moment might be her last with him. The thought pressed so hard against her chest she could scarcely breathe. When Alaric entered, his face shadowed by thought, she rose quickly. Their eyes met, and she knew he had heard. "They mean to send me away," she said, her voice breaking the silence between them. His gaze dropped to Edmund, then back. "I have delayed it," he said, "but I cannot protect you if you stay too close to him." She shook her head. "I cannot abandon him. He needs me." For a moment, his composure cracked. The weight of duty pulled at him, but his eyes spoke something else, an admission he dared not voice. He stepped closer, then stopped, caught between what he wanted and what he was allowed. "Clara," he began, but he swallowed the rest, his throat tightening. "Go before they force you. For his sake, not yours." Her breath trembled. "For his sake, I must remain." Neither moved, though the space between them seemed charged with everything they could not say. Then Edmund stirred, breaking the silence with a sleepy murmur. Clara turned quickly back to him, adjusting his blanket, her hand steady, though her heart shook. Moments later, guards arrived at the door. Their faces were impassive, their words formal. "The maid must leave." Clara froze. Alaric stepped forward. "Not tonight," he ordered, voice iron. "She will not be dragged in the dark like a criminal." The guards bowed stiffly, retreating. But the message had been delivered. Clara's time was measured now not in days, but hours. She gathered her few belongings when night fell, the small bundle fitting easily in her hands. Before she left Edmund's side, she bent to arrange his toys. Her fingers brushed against the wooden chest. Something crinkled beneath the folded cloth inside. She lifted it carefully. A paper, sealed with Serafina's crest, its folds crisp as though hidden in haste. She opened it with trembling hands. The words were cold, commanding. The boy's treatment must end at once, no exercise, no attempts to stand to ensure his safety and the security of the realm. Her chest tightened. Proof. Here was proof, undeniable and direct. But the latch at the door clicked. The guards had returned. Clara clutched the paper and pressed it flat against her dress, hiding it in the folds. She stood tall, her bundle in one hand, her secret in the other. The guards stepped into the room. "It is time," one said. Clara's heart raced, but her face remained calm. She bent once more to kiss Edmund's hair, whispering softly, "Be strong." As she straightened, Alaric entered from the opposite door. His eyes flicked at once to the bundle in her hands, the guards at her side, the boy asleep on the chaise. Clara met his gaze, her pulse wild. the hidden paper burning against her ribs. The guards moved forward, ready to lead her out, when Alaric raised a hand, his voice sharp with authority. "You will wait." The guards halted. Silence filled the room. Clara stood, caught between dismissal and revelation, her hand pressed to the proof concealed in her dress, and in that breath, she knew she carried the only weapon that could save the boy, or destroy them all. The chamber lay tense, the silence straining like a rope pulled too tight. Alaric's raised hand had stopped the guards, but the command could not halt the current of inevitability pressing on them all. Clara stood with her bundle in one arm, and her other hand pressed to her bodice, the hidden letter sharp against her skin like a blade she dared not draw. "Leave us," Alaric ordered, his voice steady but low. The guards exchanged a look, hesitating, until he fixed them with a stare that brooked no question. They bowed stiffly and withdrew, the latch closing behind them. Only then did Alaric turn back, his eyes dark with conflict. "You should not have been brought to this," he said, his voice quieter now, though every syllable cut through the air. Clara tried to swallow, but her throat caught. "They mean to cast me out, Your Highness. Perhaps it is best. She will not rest until I am gone." His gaze flicked to Edmund, sleeping peacefully, then back to her. "If you go, he will be defenseless." She steadied herself, lowering her eyes. "Perhaps he already is." The words struck him harder than if she had shouted. He stepped closer, the measured distance between them dissolving. "Do not say that." Clara lifted her head, and for the first time in days, she allowed her fear to show. "I have no place to speak. A maid's voice cannot carry against hers. What good am I if I cannot protect him?" He looked at her as though the answer were written plainly before him. "You are his hope." His voice dropped, thick with emotion he did not often allow. "And mine." Her breath caught. She gripped the bundle tighter to stop her hands from trembling. Between them lay unspoken truths, dangerous as fire. Footsteps sounded faintly beyond the door. Clara tensed, hiding her expression behind composure. "You must not be seen favoring me." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Let them think what they will. I know the truth." But the truth, she thought, was fragile as parchment, and parchment could burn. She clutched the letter closer, though he did not yet know it existed. She dared not show him here, not with ears at every wall. At dawn, she was gone. The guards came again, this time without Alaric's protest. He was absent, called to council. Clara was led through the servants' passage, her bundle light, her step heavier than it had ever been. She did not struggle, did not speak. At the courtyard gate, she paused once, looking back at the high windows. Behind one of them, Edmund would be waking and finding her absent. She pressed her hand over her chest, where the letter lay hidden, and let herself be taken beyond the walls. Hours later, Alaric stood at his desk, his thoughts a storm. The chamber was empty, yet the air still carried her presence. His hand brushed the edge of the parchment he had hidden days before. The first letter, Serafina's order to halt treatment. His mind circled it, but the court demanded patience. A knock disturbed his torment. His steward entered, bowing. "The Duchess requests your presence, sire. She has an announcement to make before the council." Alaric frowned. "Now?" "Yes, sire. She insists it is urgent." When he entered the council chamber, Serafina already stood at its center, radiant in poise, her hands folded over her stomach. The lords assembled leaned forward, sensing drama. She waited for Alaric to take his place before the words fell. "I bring news of joy," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly. "I am with child." The chamber erupted in murmurs, astonishment mingling with applause. Several lords rose, bowing, congratulating. One declared that heaven itself had smiled upon the realm. Alaric stood motionless, the blood draining from his face. His eyes locked on Serafina's, but her expression was unreadable, controlled as marble. The weight of her words clamped around him like iron. One of the older lords stepped forward. "This secures the succession, sire. The realm is doubly blessed. We shall celebrate at once." Alaric heard the chorus of agreement, the tide of voices drowning the chamber. But his mind flashed not to the Duchess's triumph, but to the boy in his chamber, the boy who still fought to walk. Edmund, his heir, now made an afterthought by a single claim. His hand closed over the coat at his breast where the first letter lay. He felt the shape of it, thin yet heavy, like a heart no longer beating, but to draw it now would be ruin. Serafina bowed her head gracefully, acknowledging the flood of praise, yet her eyes flicked to him, sharp with unspoken warning. "Challenge me, and you will stand alone." He said nothing. The council adjourned in triumph. Outside the chamber, Alaric stood still until the voices faded, then pressed a hand against the stone wall as though to steady himself. The corridor was empty, yet he felt surrounded by the echoes of loyalty given to her. In another part of the palace, Clara slipped through a narrow door, her cloak pulled tight. She had returned in silence, unseen. Her dismissal had not carried her far. She had lingered at the village beyond the walls, waiting for the moment her courage overcame her fear. The letter still rested hidden in her bodice. Tonight, she would risk everything to place it where it must be seen. Moving by memory, she entered the dim passages she had once walked daily. Her steps were swift, light, her heart pounding. She carried no candle, trusting the pale light from the high windows. At last she reached the prince's study. She dared not wait for him. She laid the folded paper upon his desk, sealing it with nothing but her trembling hope. When Alaric returned late, the chamber was empty. The fire burned low. Upon his desk lay a letter he had not placed there. He frowned, breaking the seal. The words inside were the same hand as the one he already carried, the same command to halt his son's treatment. But this one bore harsher phrasing, less careful. It was proof beyond doubt, the twin to the first, impossible to deny. His hand shook as he read, his chest filled with fury, and with sudden clarity. Clara had risked everything to bring this to him. The door creaked. He turned swiftly, the letter still open in his hand. A shadow filled the frame. It was Serafina. Her eyes fell on the desk, then on his hand gripping the letter. For the first time, her composure faltered, and in that instant, Alaric understood that the battle could no longer be silent. The morning dawned gray, heavy with mist that clung to the palace stones. Inside, the great hall had been transformed again, this time for solemnity rather than revelry. Nobles gathered in expectation, their voices lowered, their eyes sharp. Today, the prince was to give his formal word, an announcement that would bind him to Serafina before all who mattered. Musicians played softly, a restrained melody that kept the air taut. The king sat upon his chair at the far end, his presence lending gravity, though his gaze betrayed weariness. Courtiers lined the marble floor in neat ranks, their silks rustling faintly as they adjusted themselves for the moment to come. Alaric stood near the center, his figure straight though his stomach felt hollow. In his coat, close to his chest, lay the letters Clara had placed before him. The ink still burned his mind. He could hear Serafina's voice in them, commanding, merciless. Yet around him rose the swell of expectation, the tide of voices that demanded he proceed. Serafina entered to a hush, every eye turning. She moved with grace as measured as a march, her gown trailing like a banner behind her. She inclined her head toward the king, then took her place beside Alaric. Her hand hovered near his arm but did not touch. It was closeness meant for the eyes of others. The herald's voice rose. Let it be known that this day, before the king and his loyal court, His Highness Prince Alaric shall declare his vow to Lady Serafina, Duchess of Avalon, betrothing himself to her in the name of the realm. The words struck like chains. Alaric's breath tightened. He looked down the hall, across the assembled faces, lords eager, ladies smiling, attendants watching for every flicker of dissent. He saw no allies there, His father, tired upon the throne, seemed far away. The herald paused, bowing toward him. "Your Highness, you may speak." Seraphina's eyes slid to him, gleaming with victory. She raised her chin, ready to receive what she believed inevitable. Alaric parted his lips. The hall leaned forward. But the great doors opened. A sound ran through the chamber, shock made audible. The courtiers turned as one. In the doorway stood Clara, her dress plain, her face pale but resolved, and at her side, small yet unyielding, was Edmund. The boy leaned upon his cane, the wooden tap echoing louder than any drum. Gasps filled the room. Some ladies clutched their gloves. A few lords frowned, scandal in their eyes. Edmund's steps were slow, his body trembling, but each one rang with defiance. Clara bent slightly, her hand hovering near but never taking his strength away. Alaric's heart lurched. He moved forward, but stopped, struck still by the sight of his son standing, struggling, yet standing, before the entire court. The boy lifted his face, his voice breaking but determined. "I can walk. Clara helps me." The words, though thin, cut through the hall with a clarity that no herald could match. Murmurs erupted. Shock, doubt, disbelief swirled among the nobles like wind through leaves. Seraphina's composure cracked. She took a step forward, her voice rising sharper than intended. "This is cruelty. Look at him, shaking, pale. He has been forced into this display. The maid exploits him for pity." Her claim met resistance in the eyes of some who had seen the boy's resolve. The king leaned forward, his brows knit, studying the scene. The hall fell quieter, waiting for Alaric to act. Clara knelt beside Edmund, her voice gentle but carrying. "No one forced you. Tell them." Edmund clutched the cane, his knuckles white. "I wanted to. She said I mustn't, but I wanted to." His gaze turned toward Seraphina, confusion clouded with hurt. "She said I should never try." The hall shuddered with whispers. Seraphina's face hardened, her mouth set. "The child is too young to understand. He repeats what he is told." "Shall we risk his life on the words of a maid and a boy?" Her gaze locked on Alaric, daring him to contradict her. Alaric's hand went to his coat. He felt the letters against his chest. The silence demanded choice. He could speak now, expose her, and turn the court into uproar, or remain bound, chained by appearances. The king's voice cut through. Proof must be shown. His tone was heavy, deliberate. Words are not enough in this hall. The nobles nodded. They wanted certainty, evidence, something they could stand behind without risk. Seraphina straightened, her confidence returning. She spread her hands in a gesture of patience, her lips curving in a faint smile. Clara's eyes darted toward Alaric. In them he saw urgency, faith, and the weight of all he had denied her. She had risked everything to stand here. Edmund swayed, the cane trembling beneath him, yet his face burned with determination. The herald stepped forward. "Your Highness, the king requests proof. Will you speak it?" Alaric looked at the boy, then at Clara. His hand closed around the letters hidden in his coat. And for a breath, the world stood still, the hall holding its breath for what he would do next. The silence in the great hall was unbearable, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every heartbeat sound like betrayal. Alaric stood, his hand clenched around the letters hidden within his coat. Before him, Clara knelt beside Edmund, her face pale but fearless, her eyes imploring him to act. Around them, nobles shifted like restless birds, their whispers feeding the tension that seemed to thicken the air. The king's voice had not softened. "Proof must be shown," he had said, and his command still hung above them like a weight no one else could lift. Alaric stepped forward, his boots striking the marble with purpose. He drew the letters from his coat and held them high, his voice carrying steady and strong. "Then let proof speak." Gasps rippled through the hall as the red seals flashed in the candlelight. Courtiers craned their necks to see. Alaric crossed the floor to the king. bowing with solemnity before placing the papers into his father's hand. The king broke the seal with deliberate care. His eyes scanned the ink, his lips tightening as the words cut into him. The chamber grew still, every ear straining for his verdict. Alaric's voice rang out again, not waiting for judgment alone. "These are commands written in the hand of Seraphina, orders to halt my son's treatment, to condemn him to stillness and despair. She has acted not for his safety, but for her own ambition." The lords erupted in shock. Some turned to one another, pale with disbelief. Others muttered darkly, unwilling yet to abandon their champion. The weight of scandal pressed down like storm clouds, heavy and threatening. Seraphina stepped forward, her composure cracked but not broken. "Forgeries," she declared, her voice sharp, commanding, "crafted by jealous hands. That maid," she pointed at Clara with a trembling finger, "has sought to entrap me. She envies my place and conspires to ruin me." Clara flinched under the accusation, but her chin lifted. "I sought only to protect him." Her voice trembled, yet the truth in it rang clear. The king raised his hand, silencing the noise. His gaze swept the letters again, then lifted to his son. "This bears her seal, her signature. The words are hers." A murmur ran through the chamber, shifting, changing. Doubt cracked into conviction. A few nobles who had stood firm at Seraphina's side stepped back, their loyalty cooling into distance. Seraphina's breath quickened. Her eyes darted from face to face, seeking ground that melted beneath her feet. "I wrote for caution," she said, her voice faltering for the first time, "to spare the boy's suffering. What mother would not?" "You are not his mother," Alaric answered, his words thunder in the silence. "And you never shall be." The hall shook with the force of the declaration. The boy's cane slipped against the stone, but Clara steadied him. All eyes turned back to the king, who had risen from his seat with slow, terrible grace. "Ambition has no place where trust is demanded," the king said. "You sought to bind this family through deception, to wound an heir for your gain. By my word, the betrothal is annulled. You are dismissed from this hall." The words fell like a blade. Guards moved forward, their armor ringing against the floor. Seraphina's eyes widened, rage breaking through her mask. She tried to speak, but the noise of the chamber drowned her. Nobles turned their faces away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Her silks dragged behind her like chains as she was led out, her protests echoing against the walls until the doors shut. When silence returned, it was heavy, but different now, less suffocating, more awed. All eyes turned back to the prince. Alaric crossed swiftly to Edmund, kneeling before his son, his hand steady on the boy's trembling shoulder. "You were brave," he said softly. "Braver than all this hall." Edmund smiled faintly, his legs trembling from the effort of standing. He leaned into his father's hand, the warmth of it steady as stone. Alaric's gaze lifted to Clara. For a heartbeat, words hovered between them. Gratitude, apology, something deeper, something too dangerous to give voice in front of so many. Instead, he spoke with formal clarity, his voice filling the chamber. "This woman has shown more loyalty than any title could command. She has guarded my son when others sought to harm him. For that, she has my thanks before all of you." The declaration spread through the room like fire, burning away the last whispers of doubt. Some nobles bowed their heads, others exchanged glances, acknowledging what had been proven. Clara's face flushed, but she did not look away. The king seated himself once more, his voice carrying finality. "The matter is ended. Let the child be cared for. Let the realm be reminded that deceit cannot rule here." The herald struck his staff against the floor. The sound echoed, solemn, binding the judgment into memory. Alaric rose, lifting Edmund into his arms when the boy's strength faltered. Clara followed, her step careful but unyielding, as the great hall parted before them. The whispers had changed. No longer suspicion, no longer doubt. Now they carried admiration, wonder, even a measure of shame from those who had been too quick to follow Serafina's lead. The heavy doors closed behind them, shutting away the noise of the court. In the corridor, silence returned, but it was gentler now. Alaric paused, shifting Edmund carefully in his arms. He looked at Clara. The fire of battle still burned in him, but his voice, when it came, was soft. The truth is free at last. Clara's eyes glistened, but she held them steady on his. She bowed her head slightly, her voice low, reverent. It was always there, Your Highness. It only needed courage to be seen. For the first time in many years, Alaric allowed himself to breathe fully. He held his son close. Clara walked beside him. And for one fragile moment, hope felt possible again. The wind came gentler now, losing the bite it had carried all winter. In the palace garden, the hedges had traded their rigid black for a softened green, each clipped wall furred with new leaf. Morning light struck the gravel and made it shine as if strewn with fine sugar. The fountain spoke in an easy voice, not loud, not shy, just enough to ask a person to breathe differently. Alaric stood at the edge of the path with his hands loosely clasped, a posture he did not wear in public. The great house rose behind him, an old guardian made of stone and memory. Before him, at a measured distance, Edmund made his slow way along the flagstones with his cane. Tap, pause, tap, pause. The rhythm set itself in Alaric's chest, the way a drum does before a march. He kept to the margin of the path, because this was Edmund's road. At each step the boy's shoulders climbed, sank, climbed again. Sweat made a bright line where it gathered at the temple and slipped toward the ear. The small jaw tightened with the discipline of a soldier. It was a solemn business, learning to move one's own body again. "You may stop," Alaric said, when the cane paused longer than usual. Edmund did not turn. "Two more," he answered, breath short but steady. Alaric smiled the way a man smiles when he is proud and will not fracture a child's concentration by saying so. The garden's scents, box, damp earth, a thread of lavender left from last year, rose around him. He had stood in this spot each morning as the world softened into spring. He had watched these steps multiplied until watching became a prayer and then a habit, and then something more ordinary and more holy than either. Clara walked beside Edmund at an arm's length, never touching until touch was needed. Her hand hovered in the space where the boy's balance faltered, and then withdrew when it steadied. Her eyes counted effort and rest with the precision of someone who had learned that care is a science when feeling alone cannot save a life. Alaric looked at her, and then looked away because looking was dangerous. He had allowed himself in the week since the hall had been cleared of lies to say what could be said. "Thank you. Stay. I trust you." He had not yet given the words that would change not only the day but the shape of all his days. Those waited in his chest like a bird that had learned the window might be opened if it did not fling itself against the glass. "Two," Edmund announced, the cane landing with a small, triumphant sound. He stopped, tipped his head back, and closed his eyes as if the sky might applaud. It did not, but the wind did stroke his hair in a way that looked like approval. "Well done," Clara said, the praise plain and exact, not the empty sugar he hated. "Now we sit. Your legs are a team that must be kept friendly." Edmund laughed and let her guide him to the bench. Alaric crossed to them and stood opposite, as if the three of them made a compass that only worked when set this way. "How do you feel?" Alaric asked. "Taller," Edmund said, taking the measure of pride he had earned. "You are," Alaric answered, and the boy's grin widened. Clara's hands moved with practiced economy. Cloak settled, cane leaned, breath counted. She lifted her eyes to the prince briefly, and then returned them to the boy. There was a color in her cheek that had not been there in winter. The garden had put a little of itself in her. "We can go farther along the path," Edmund said through panting, bargaining with his breath as all children do. "Tomorrow, Clara said. "Today we made a promise to your knees, and I mean to keep it." Edmund accepted this with mock severity. He tipped the cane forward and back on its rubberless tip as if it were a metronome for the morning. Tap, tap, tap. The sound threaded itself through the space between them. Alaric let the sound play, and then he sat at the opposite end of the bench. The fountain's mist drew cool lines across his face. He could taste iron at the back of his throat, the residue of anger that had burned away behind closed doors, and the sweetness that came after. He breathed deeper and found the breath stayed. "Clara," he said, the name taking its full place in his mouth. She looked across the boy at him. Her eyes held steadiness as always. Beneath it, something gentler moved, the kind of softness that can lift a weight no one sees. "I have said the public words," he began, searching for the right pace, "but I have not said the ones that belong to us." She studied his face, and then glanced at Edmund, and then back. "We should not." "We should," he cut in gently, as if correcting a posture, not a person. "Because it is daylight, because truths spoken in daylight are not so easily stolen." The boy, sensing the change, lowered his cane and set it carefully by his knee. He did not fidget. He had learned in long hours to be still when grown-ups' words required a particular shape of silence. He leaned into Clara the way a plant leans into a wall that keeps off the wind. Alaric set his hands on his knees, palms open, making himself vulnerable in the only way a man in his place can. Not with a bow, not with a gift, but with the willingness to be clearly seen. "I watched you teach my son how to be brave without defiance," he said. "You gave him work, not miracles. I watched you pinch fear into something precise enough to be useful. You did that for him. You did it for me." Clara's lips parted. Words rose and fell. She closed them again. He went on. "I thought I knew what love required. The right names, the right rooms, the right alliances. I was wrong. Love requires this." He nodded toward Edmund, toward the cane, toward her hands. "Hours. Patience, patience. Stubborn mercy. Truth told without show." The morning laid a coin of light on her cheekbone. She turned her face a fraction, as if to feel its warmth fully before it moved on. "You speak as if I am the brave one," she said, earning time for her heart to catch up with her breath. "But you broke the hall. That was not my doing." "I could not have if you had not placed the stone in my hand," he returned. "Courage does not always strike. Sometimes it is delivered." He swallowed. "I want to ask you—" His voice faltered, then found itself again. "To stand where you already stand, beside him." "Beside me, not as a servant, as the person who makes this place a home." Clara did not reach for the bench. She did not move at all. Only her eyes changed, going brighter and then steadier, as if water had risen and clarified in the same motion. "You are a prince," she said. The words were not accusation. They were simple architecture. "The court will speak." "They speak always," he answered, a hint of wryness shading the softness. "Let them tire their mouths on us if they wish. Their words cannot carry Edmund down this path. Ours can." Her gaze flicked downward toward the cane, toward the boy's small hand resting on it, toward the marks in the gravel where effort left its soft signature. When she looked back, the argument in her face had softened into a fear that was harder to heal. Not of others, but of happiness, which asks a person to lay down the familiar armor of longing. "Do you love me?" she asked. He could have said yes with a dozen courtly turns. He chose the plain road. "I do." "Not because I brought letters," she added, laying the trap at his feet so he would not step in it later. "No," he said, "because you brought yourself each morning. Because you did not run when the loudest voices were wrong. Because when you touch him, you teach me how to touch the world and not bruise it." He paused, then allowed the smallest smile. "Because your courage humbles mine." The fountain's voice seemed to lean closer. The wind moved through the yews and brought them a smell of crushed green. Clara breathed in. She let it out slowly, and in that breath set down the last defenses she had kept not against him, but against hope. "I love you," she said. "I tried not to. It made no difference." Edmund looked from one face to the other, serious, as if they were reading a difficult page together, and he must not interrupt. Then his seriousness broke in a grin that had not visited him since before the fall. He reached across his own lap and took his father's hand and then Clara's, and put them together, as if arranging pieces in a play that at last made sense. "There," he said, satisfied, and leaned back as if a job had been completed to his standard. Alaric did not withdraw. He closed his fingers around Clara's and felt the world move a little under his feet, the way it does when a ship leaves the harbor and the water holds. "It will not be easy," she said softly, "not to undo the moment, but to honor it." "No," he agreed, "but it will be ours." They sat like that while the garden continued its ordinary miracles. A robin picked impatiently at a patch of moss. A leaf detached from a hedge and drifted down as if trying out the idea of falling before summer had even finished arriving. Far off, a bell marked the hour no one here needed to know. Edmund shifted, then tapped the cane twice against the stone for the pleasure of hearing it. "Shall we go to the next bench?" he asked, ambition already nibbling at prudence. "Halfway," Clara bargained, mock stern, and ruffled his hair when he pretended to bargain back. Alaric stood and offered his hand, the way a father does when offering is not a favor, but a right the child has earned. Edmund took it with the practical air of a prince who happens to be 6. Clara rose on the other side, their triangle reforming without words. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded and set the cane forward. The first step was tentative and then decided. The second found the pattern. The third nearly went wrong and did not, because 2 hands were ready to make the air itself a brace. "Listen," Edmund said after a few moments, cheeks flushed. "It sounds like a song." "It does," Alaric said. "If the stones are the drum, and the cane is the sticks. And your voices are the singing," Edmund added, not embarrassed to make poetry out of labor. Clara glanced at Alaric and surprised herself by laughing, a sound freed of strain. The laugh drew a look from him that he did not hide. It was not the look a prince gives when he offers a favor. It was the look of a man who has chosen and rests in that choosing. They reached the halfway mark and rested under a trellis where new leaves cast a light shade. Clara steadied Edmund's shoulders while his legs did their small, stubborn shaking. Alaric kept his hand near without crowding. "I have a question," Edmund said, curious and solemn at once. "When we go inside, will she still be here?" Clara felt the old reflex in her muscles, the one that made her expect to be sent away when joy entered a room. It was an old habit. Habits are not truth. "She will," Alaric said, looking at her when he answered him. "If she wishes." "I do," she said simply, amazed how such a small sentence could hold so much. Edmund nodded as if he had signed off on the plan. "Good," he said, "because the cane is better when she's near." "We will tell the cane that," Alaric replied, amused. They resumed. A cloud moved across the sun and made the path cooler, so Edmund set his jaw and pretended the cold could not boss him. When they reached the next bench, his breath came in small bursts, but with more confidence than fatigue. Clara praised his wisdom for stopping. Alaric praised his stubbornness for starting. Both were true. They sat again, not because there was nothing to say, but because saying is sometimes better done in rest. "After this," Alaric said to the boy, "we will take broth." "With bread?" Edmund asked. "With bread," Clara answered, and her tone made it sound like a treaty. Alaric watched her as she spoke. He saw in her the same things that had anchored him in the storm: solid kindness, the refusal to make theater out of caring, a quick wit that turned fear into something manageable. He felt gratitude, but it was not gratitude only. Desire moved in him, but it did not burn. It warmed. He thought of the dangerous rooms where this story would be told poorly by those who did not understand and found he no longer cared. The story that mattered was here, on the stone, under this small roof of leaves. "Clara," he said softly, catching a stray thread of her attention. She turned. "Yes?" "Tonight," he said, letting the word carry more than supper, more than hours. "Walk with me." Her mouth softened. "I am walking with you now." He accepted the correction with a tilt of his head. "Then tonight we will keep doing it. In the long gallery, past the portraits, past the windows where the stars come close." She saw it then. Not a formal courtship plotted by others, but a shared practice, as modest and demanding as Edmund's steps. "Yes," she said. "We will." Edmund sighed happily. "Will we take the cane?" "We will take the cane," Alaric said, and if his voice also answered a question Clara had not asked aloud, no one remarked on it. They rose again for the small journey back. The palace watched without judging. The windows kept their bright blanks. The fountain kept its companionable talk. At the door, the taste of cool stone replaced the garden's green. Edmund's feet found the thresholds more confidently than they had an hour before. Practice, Clara had told him from the beginning, is a kind of bargain. You give time, time gives back itself made better. At the antechamber, Alaric paused with his hand on the latch. He looked at Clara as a man looks when he is about to step into a room that he knows will change under his hand. "Ready?" he asked, and the word had nothing to do with the door. She nodded. "Ready?" They entered together. The room held the imprint of nights that had nearly undone them and mornings that had stitched them again. Edmund climbed onto the chaise with less effort than he had used the last time. Clara set the cane in its now honored place beside the chair. Alaric crossed to the window and threw it open a little wider than custom allowed, letting the garden step in after them. He returned and stood before them both. He did not kneel, did not raise a glass, did not call for witnesses. He only took Clara's hand where it rested on Edmund's blanket and drew it gently into his. "Let the world speak," he said quietly. "We will live." Clara held his gaze. "We will," she said. Edmund, content with the finality of the matter, leaned back and closed his eyes, his hand still resting on the cane as if to tell it that it belonged. Outside, the fountain went on. Inside, the air eased. The three of them sat in the small circle they made and allowed silence to do the last part of the work words could not finish. In that shared quiet, a family arranged itself like pieces of music settling into harmony, and the steady tap of a cane, once the sound of limitation, kept time for a life newly begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.